hopefully our final speaker will join us. So good morning, everyone. So excited to have you here. My name is Jean Sue, and I am an Associate Conservation Director and Attorney with the Center for Biological Diversity, which is a US-based group, and we use creative and strategic litigation and campaigning to keep fossil fuels in the ground in the United States. I'm so excited to have you here today because we're talking about one of the most critical areas to actually realizing the Paris Agreement goals, which is to keep fossil fuels in the ground. We are honored to have 6 incredible panelists with us. And before I introduce them, I just want to give us a snapshot of where we are in the world right now. So the politics of the situation is that we are in a crisis where our member nation states are actually not pledging what they need to pledge to reach the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal. Scientists have estimated that the pledges accumulate to close to 3 degrees Celsius, which takes us far beyond what we need to get to in order to avoid catastrophic climate change. So where does that leave us, and why are we here today? Science tells us that in order to actually bring reality to the rhetoric of the Paris Agreement, we actually need to tackle the supply side of the issue and stop fossil fuel extraction. A recent Oil Change International study found that even currently operating oil, gas, and coal fields, even those without building any more, will take us to 2 degrees Celsius already. So it's imperative right now that we as global civil society are here to actually demand and set the agenda that where government has inaction in keeping fossil fuels in the ground, we on the ground in different nation states demand for those projects to be halted. What we're here, I'm honored here today to be with 6 panelists who I'll introduce right now, who are all at the forefront of halting fossil fuel extraction using different strategic methods across the world. Here they are. We have Max Andersson, who is a member of the European Parliament of the EU. Next to him, we're honored to have Lidy Nacpil, who is the coordinator of the Asian People's Movement for Debt and Development in the Philippines. Next to her is Alberto Salvamondo, who is with the Indigenous Environmental Network in the United States. Next to him is Boniface Mumba, who is Executive Director of the Center for Environmental Justice in Zambia. And last but not least, we have Filip Lövström, who is an incredible activist with Push Sweden. And we will be waiting for Martin Vilela, who hopefully will be coming soon. So to start us off today, I just want to let everyone know that this is a conversation format. We're not going to have any PowerPoint presentations because I think everyone's glazed over by them at this point. But what we do have are incredible images across the world of this movement happening. We are on the precipice of an incredible global movement, and it is booming right now. Some of the images that you'll see here are actually in solidarity for Standing Rock that occurred in all 50 states in the United States yesterday, as well as here at COP22. And so we dedicate this panel actually to standing in solidarity with Standing Rock, with Imidir, and with all Indigenous peoples movements across the world that are fighting fossil fuel extraction. So for the opening question, I'd love to, and finally, if you have any questions, please tweet it using the hashtag of KingCop, and we'll be able to get those into the conversation while we're talking and getting the collective wisdom of this panel. So to kick us off, I just want to ask the first opening question, which is, what does keep it in the ground actually mean to each of your movements? And I also apologize for the gender imbalance on the panel today, as we've had a couple of different substitutions in. But with that, ladies first. Lidy, would you like to kick us off?
Okay, honored to be a woman in this panel. We have to have more women on panels. But just to say, I'm from the Philippines, and we are actually part of a wider network, the Asian People's Movement on Debt and Development in Asia, that has member movements in more than 10 countries in Asia. And this includes many countries where there are movements fighting to keep fossil fuels in the ground. For Asia, as it is for the Philippines, a major fight is about coal. Now, coal is the largest actually source of electricity energy in Asia, being promoted aggressively as we speak. In my country alone, in the Philippines, there's more than 45 new coal projects that is being planned in the pipeline. This is for coal-fired power plants, and 118 new environmental certificates that were awarded in the last 2 years for new coal mines. So the fight against coal mines is one of example, or a strong example, of how people in the Philippines are fighting against extraction of fossil fuel. The fight against coal mines started way before, and many years ago in the Philippines, even before our people have been very attuned to the issue of climate change, which they are today. The Philippines is one of the most affected. We have had hundreds of thousands of people dislocated event. Just in one event alone, Typhoon Haiyan, which I think everyone knows about as the strongest typhoon hitting landfall, displaced about 2 million people. But I would like to emphasize that coal mines have the worst impacts on communities that host coal mines. That even if we don't talk about climate, it's people are in the communities are fighting to get coal mines out of their communities, or to stop coal mines from being started in their communities. So this is a fight for life and death for these communities, a fight for livelihoods, because the impact of coal mines is to pollute the water, the land, the air, so much so that they are not only suffering from many illnesses related with coal ash and coal pollution, they are also unable to have productive livelihoods because of the way coal has poisoned the environment itself. So we know, and this is one of the things I'd like to emphasize in terms of what fight this is for us. We know we cannot do this just project by project or mine by mine. We need to have a comprehensive policy by the government to stop coal mining altogether. So it has been a national fight, not just been a fight of communities. And we are anticipating some immediate victories in the near future. For instance, there's going to be a suspension of the issuance of new ECCs, environmental compliance certificates, for new coal mines and for other mines, actually, because there's a huge anti-extractivist movement in the Philippines. And we are saying that it is an important step, but only a step towards victory against fossil fuel.
Thank you, Lidy. Filip, would you like to take this next question?
Absolutely. So my name is Filip. I'm from Push Sweden, a youth network where Push translates to the platform where youth cooperates for sustainability. So we gather a lot of youth from the whole of Sweden, and I'm also part of the Keep It in the Ground movement in Sweden and Northern Europe. To me, Keep It in the Ground movement stands for hope, and I'd like to broaden the picture of the Keep It in the Ground movement. This century that we have ahead of us can either be the story of how we failed to live within the planetary boundaries and how we fail to respect human rights. Or we can transform this into the story of how we manage to create life worthy for all humans and how we manage to respect the integrity of the ecosystems around us. And to me, the Keep It in the Ground movement is a stepping stone towards this. The opposite of the Keep It in the Ground movement would be Take It from the Ground movement, which would mean that we would take things from the ground, give it some sort of fictional value, and use it and put carbon in our atmosphere and put so many pollutants all over the place, and take us to a place where we have runaway climate change. And in that light, the Keeping the Ground movement really becomes the most sensible thing you can do, because if you look at nature, everything in nature is circular. The only thing that's linear is the human's economic system and the humans that take things from the ground, make something from it, and dump it where it cannot be used again. So for us to be circular, for us to stay within the planetary boundaries, and for us to respect human rights, we need to keep it in the ground, and that's what this movement means to me.
Bring a different perspective to this movement.
Yeah, like what does keep it in the ground mean for me? like Filip, I am from Sweden, and Sweden hardly produces any fossil fuel. No, no oil fields, no coal mines, no big gas fields. So we're on the consuming part of the equation. And Sweden, all consumers also have a moral responsibility of trying to limit, no, not trying, actually limiting our emissions. Because if we are going to survive uh, as this great civilization we have on Earth today, we are going to need to limit our emissions vastly. We all know this. Some people say it's 60% of all the coal and the gas and oil needs to stay below the ground. Others say 80, others say even more. And we on the consuming side, we have this responsibility to start limiting our emissions. I'm a politician for the Swedish Green Party, where we used to be quite big in the cities. We were the biggest party of the biggest cities in Sweden last election to the European Parliament. Now we're in government, and we're doing the usual Green Party's first time in government have a rough first time in government. But we are trying to change the legislation in order to further the Swedish energy transition and see to it that Sweden consumes a lot less carbon dioxide. And that is what Keep It in the Ground means for me.
Alberto, can you tell us about what the Keep It in Ground movement means for your movement in the United States?
Yes, good morning, everyone. We'd like to thank you for coming. I have a statement from Tom Goldtooth, the director of the Indigenous Environmental Network, that he would like me to read to you. But I think it answers more than just.
Alberto, could you move your microphone a bit closer to her?
I think. Okay, thank you. I think that his statement will answer a great many questions, not just what Keep It in the Ground means to Indigenous peoples, and particularly to the Standing Rock occupation. It starts all my relations. We first thank the Amazigh peoples for their warm welcome to their lands. The Standing Rock Sioux tribe, as members of the 7 council fires of the Great Sioux Nation, defense of our sacred waters is different. We are not protesters. We are protectors and defenders of our sacred water, water of life, and guardians that recognize the rights of the life cycles and natural laws of Mother Earth and nature. It must be remembered that our defense began with the Standing Rock Lakota youth running to Washington, D.C., not only to draw attention to this black snake threatening the Missouri River and the tribe's source of water, but in an act of prayer. Cross-country running in many Indigenous cultures is a spiritual act that involves ceremony and prayer. This pipeline black snake threatens not only the tribe's sacred water, but it is also the source of clean water and life for 17 million people downstream. The Dakota Access Pipeline will transport 500,000 barrels of hydraulic fractured shale oil a day, oil that will release emissions of 101.4 million tons of CO2, as much as 30 American coal power plants every year. The black snake represents a world out of balance, which views all life as private property and looks at Mother Earth as without a soul or spirit. It is part of business as usual, with the expansion of fossil fuel development on or near Indigenous lands. It is a climate justice issue. The struggle against the pipeline is a defense of life. In our cultures, the women are the keepers of the water and have been the strong hearts of our water defenders. Water is life, and this black snake wants to eat it. It wants to eat all that is sacred, all sacred sources of life. Indigenous peoples all over the world are defending life that is woven into our struggle for our rights as Indigenous peoples. Even though we are less than 10% of the world's population, according to the Global Witness, Of the number of environmental defenders assassinated just this year, over 50% are indigenous. Berta Cáceres from Nicaragua, from Honduras, often said that she was not an environmentalist. She was an indigenous woman concerned about a hydroelectric project that threatened the Lenca people's source of life, and she was assassinated. But our sister Berta lives. A couple of weeks ago, during an action at the pipeline site, a herd of buffalo came running toward it. You may have seen the video of it on Facebook. It was very moving. The Buffalo Nation, who is also our brothers and sisters, are also concerned about this black snake. My relatives at Standing Rock firmly believe, as all indigenous peoples in struggle all over the world, that our strength is our prayer, our ceremony, our sacred fires, our drum, and our song. The Buffalo Nation is our strength, as is our spiritual ceremony that we practice every day. Every morning we have ceremony by the river. Now the company has fenced off the pipeline site against the Buffalo Nation. They fear what they do not understand. The strength of all indigenous peoples and struggle in defense of life is our spiritual practice. The right to protect our sacred and cultural areas. All over the world, from the tar sands in Canada, the pipelines of poison and dirty oil that are expanding throughout Turtle Island, North America, to fracking in Northern Africa, our indigenous peoples are being affected with fracking and production of even more oil to Honduras and Copin, to Ecuador, and indigenous peoples defending our lives to Asia and Africa. We do not fear them. We call upon all indigenous peoples and all humanity to continue their prayers and their ceremony wherever they struggle. They will gather with ours and others defending life. We are taking back our power in the strengthening of our communities. We thank all persons and organizations of goodwill to join us in defense of life, in defense of the sacred, in defense of our human rights, and the rights of Mother Earth and Father Sky. We are calling out to the world to implement real solutions to mitigating and adapting to a changing climate and to make a global transition away from a dependence on a fossil fuel economy. We are all related. Omataku Yasin. On a personal level, that is our strength. That is our communities, our spiritual strength. From a personal perspective, money is bad medicine. But with a strong spirit, it goes back on itself. And this pipeline company is now suffering economic consequences of delay. That strength is what they don't understand, but that is what we call upon all persons of goodwill to continue this as a spiritual struggle and to keep it in the ground. I'm sorry if I take too much time, but I have to honor the other 50% of environmentalists that are assassinated every year. For instance, last Saturday, there was an assassination in Guatemala where a young lawyer, Jeremy Abrams Barrios Lima, was assassinated. His organization of lawyers defending frontline communities has received hundreds of death threats. We also want to honor the Imidir occupation by the Amazigh peoples who are struggling to protect their water from a silver mine. All of these things are joined, as the panelists have pointed out. We are all related. It is the same struggle. So we thank you for receiving us and for honoring Sacred Stone Camp. But in doing that, you also honor all frontline communities, grassroots people that defend our water and our life. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sue, and good morning to everyone. I'm Boniface Mumba, coming from Center for Environment Justice. It's an organization that's based in Africa, like in Kenya, Zambia, precisely, but work on different thematic areas, and extractives and fossil fuels have been one of our strengths, and as well as we are community oriented in working with ordinary community members as myself. I mean, to respond is to what this means. It's life. It means food security. it means livelihood. We come from a country that is about 70 or 80% depend on natural resources, mostly the forest and the waters, and also the availability of the land, meaning that we predominantly as well, our sustainability of our livelihood is driven by agriculture. But there's also a competing conflict that we have a lot of coal processing, iron ore as well as famously known for copper as well. And also there's also another thing coming in the dimension is uranium. So these whole dimensions, to us, what it means as a movement and as a people, it talks about issues to do with preservation of our culture. Most of our traditions, most of our way of life is dependent on our natural resources. I'll give you an example. Every year, there's one of the traditions of the many, of course, they have to cross the Kafue River to the upper land because the lower land is flooded. And it's a culture and they've got two homes. So they'll only come back on the other side when it's dry, and they also do the agriculture on the other side. But you find that the process is delayed due to the challenges that were imposed, as we may know, it's as a result of climate change. And as well as putting everything together, like my speakers have said, I'll not highlight much of what they've said, but it defines our courage. I mean, the struggle is not easy. The movement is not easy. I mean, what is before us is not easy. But this, just taking a step, it's a bold step. It defines our resolve, our determination, our tenacity, and our audacity. Above all, our courage to face the obstacles of this life, but also to create a better life. And it also presents to us hope, that there's great hope, as we may be aware that Africa is endowed with natural resources. I mean, every land, every portion you step, underneath it, there's something worth it. But you need to extract everything that you find, or you also need to add value to what is on the surface. Thank you.
Great. And Martin, what does keeping in the ground mean to you?
Thank you very much. Well, I think keeping on the ground in Bolivia opens and allows to open a very good debate for the climate justice movement, and also for people who is struggling against this dirty project, oil projects in Bolivia. As everywhere in Bolivia, the industry of gas and petrol is meaning death. It displaces indigenous communities. It harms water resources and harm also natural reserves in Bolivia. So in the last 10 years, the Bolivian government started to open and to build a very strong juridical security for the foreign investments on fossil fuels industry. We have a law that allows the expansion on hydrocarbon frontier for exploration and exploitation. And in the last years, the frontier has expanded 700% in the last year, in 10 years. We have another law that reduces the indigenous rights to a prior and consultation and decision. We also have a law that opened the national and natural parks to open to exploration and exploitation. And we have also a law that allows to make subsidies and forgive taxes to the big enterprises. So the presence of this big transnational of oil industry it's better now in Bolivia rather than in the last years. Also, we are developing nuclear, and we are opening the door to a very harmful mining industry on uranium. So We are doing this, in the words of the government, because we are not responsible of climate change and we have the right of development. But is it right to, is it fair that? Is it fair, this logic? Well, I think it's fair for the government and it's fair for the political and economic elites in Bolivia. But it's not fair for the people who is really being harmed by this industry in the grassroots level. So I think this is a very good opportunity to open a debate, to really complexify the climate justice narrative.
It's strange that the energy is low in this room because here we have 6 people who are on the ground or in the halls lobbying and fighting every day. And so just want to get the energy up here that this is an incredible movement, and we can see it in the pictures out there from the people and from you guys out here. So absolutely, I think what I'm hearing is that over and over again, we're looking at combating the most powerful industry in the world, the fossil fuel industry. Fossil fuels are mentioned nowhere in the Paris Agreement. Governments have failed to tackle it straight on. And here we have people on the ground who are actually making a difference on the ground to force their governments to act. So my question for all of you now, and feel free to chime in however you want, is what are the most concrete strategies you have used to actually gain momentum in your country for forcing change to halt fossil fuel extraction? Feel free to jump in. Yep.
Well, in the Philippines, of course, an important. There you go. Sorry. I think something we have learned from decades of struggling against many issues, struggling to change governments and governance in the Philippines, and now here in the struggle to transform our energy systems, we really need a mass mobilization of people, not just once, not just twice, but in a very sustained way. So what we have as our strategy first and foremost is that at the ground, communities of people, movements, organizations have to work together in order to mobilize against projects and as well as against policies and for very concrete and very clear alternatives. So one of the most recent mobilizations we've had that has been targeted against a coal project being planned in one of the provinces in the Philippines, and you will see a photo of it in these different photos being shown, is a mobilization of about 10,000 people in smaller cities in the Philippines. It is the biggest mobilization ever held on any issue thus far, and it had the cooperation of not only communities, but also churches, parishes, and also the solidarity of many groups outside of Batangas City who all traveled to Batangas from 2 a.m. to reach there in the morning to join a mobilization. So this is not just about numbers, this is also about persistence, because we've had, like many other countries, had a lot of attacks against our movements and communities who have been fighting fossil fuels, who have been fighting coal. So we need to have movements that are clearly persistent and determined and courageous enough to call for these changes. But of course, we also have other strategies combined with this. We need to be very conversant on the policies, very clear about the alternatives to convince people and policymakers that what we are talking about are not just viable, they are reasonable, and they are just.
We have yesterday, I think, there were demonstrations in every state of the Union in the United States in support of Standing Rock, against the pipeline. We have had a great deal of solidarity, even among Indian tribes. And in the United States, an imposed system of government imposed a political kind of a structure for Indian tribes that requires a president, a council, and a judiciary, which is not the traditional way of decision making most indigenous peoples in the United States. So there's sometimes a great conflict between traditional peoples, the keepers of the culture, and the tribal councils and the president that want to see more development, particularly oil and shale oil. It's interesting that the consolidated tribe, the affiliated tribes, a reservation in North Dakota, is producing the fracked oil that the pipeline wants to carry. We have had great success just with Facebook. We have been using Facebook. In fact, in the camp in Osetisakuan camp, there's a hill. Public awareness, but public solidarity with what's happening in Standing Rock. And I think that that is a challenge that we all need to do. We need to get the word out. There are people out there who are willing and able to present opposition to these, oil production, oil development, and other forms of harmful extraction. There's a movement of religious. I don't recall what their official. It's a faith group within the FCCC that recently issued a statement that was very much in keeping with what we believe is that our spiritual force, our spirituality is our greatest strength. We don't want to get into their vernacular. We don't want to get into their system of a friend of ours, Minari, an Ecuadorian indigenous person, spoke about we don't adopt their system of analysis. They say that we're poor. I mean, many of these corporations that are willing to invest money, they want the new their paradigm for forest development. What does that have to do with emissions? They see the funds, the so-called adaptation fund that is neither here nor there yet. The Green Climate Fund is a source of money for them to develop non-carbon related industry. Well, but their problem is emissions. So those are the kinds of things that we raise. Those are the kinds of things that we do. We don't adopt their class system. We don't adopt their class consciousness. They say we're poor, but we live in the forest. We live what is called el buen vivir, or the good life. A good life as we are, who we are. And that is not something that we want to include in their economic system. So I think we need a better analysis of where we are. If we adopt their development agendas and we say, well, the alleviation of poverty includes human rights, that's true. But we're also falling into that trap of, well, we have to alleviate poverty, so human rights maybe are not so important. That is what Cristina Figueres told us at a conference call. She would prefer to focus on poverty than human rights. So I think we also need to analyze what the strengths of our communities are, because that's where the struggle is being waged. And they rely on their strengths, whether they rely on their cultures, their language, their traditions. That's the strength of the local communities in struggle, and not this capitalist analysis of where we should go. And use Facebook.
Thanks, Alberto. I believe Max and Philip want to chime in on this. So Max, do you want to go first? What are the concrete strategies that you're using to affect change?
Yes. What strategies do I use? Well, I'm working a lot on the issue of lobbying, because I see that when you have a political system that is dependent on lobbying, where those who have the most money to buy lobbyist time will be able to influence decisions a lot more than those small organizations working for the common interests. Then you get a skewed political discussion, and you get bad results that are good for the major transnational corporations that have the resources to lobby, and you get bad decisions for the environment. So we need to control lobbying and regulate it. And one thing I'm working on that we should do here at the COP is to try and learn from the World Health Organizations, because they, in the Tobacco Convention, they recently decided to kick the tobacco companies out from their version of the COPs, because they see that tobacco companies, they are not going to international conferences in order to limit smoking. And Shell and Exxon and BP, when they are going to the COP, they don't go here in order to help us pollute less. So we should do what the Tobacco Convention have already done, and kick fossil fuel companies out. That's one concrete example. And if you want to look in the Tobacco Convention, look at Article 5.3, where they say this. Another thing I'm working a lot on, I have three things I'm going to say, is the issue of ISDS, investor-state dispute settlements. This is one of the contentious issues of TTIP and the CETA agreement. That is basically saying that you give the right to foreign investors to sue a country outside the normal legal system in a tribunal that is slightly or more than slightly skewed towards the corporations. And if you have a new law that would limit, you can make that law because, let's say you want to keep coal in the ground, or if you want to protect people's health, then the companies will have the right to sue for profits they don't get to make. Or more specifically, they have the right to sue for the loss of value of their investments, which is basically the same thing. These laws, these ISDS systems, have already been used to fight against climate action. The TransCanada Corporation has sued the United States for the big pipeline that they want to build. And one of the things that strikes me about that debate is that the governments who want to introduce ISDS in, for example, the CETA agreement, they are very careful to say that no, countries will still have the right to regulate. It will still be possible to make new laws. And that is true. But if you introduce these kinds of ISDS, or investment court system as it's called in CETA agreement, then you give companies the right to sue for a value of billions. And that is going to make it a lot more difficult to keep coal in the ground if we allow these treaties to go forward. And my last point, I'm saving for my next intervention because I can fit it in right there.
Okay, excellent. Philip?
Thank you. It's a very, very important question. I'm finding it incredibly interesting to listen to all your strategies. And strategy is really important, especially in times of need and in times of trouble. Because one thing that we can say is the movement to keep it in the ground really is growing immensely fast, it's growing in volume, it's growing in strength, and it's growing in voice. But what's not shrinking is the fossil fuel companies. They still have a lot of strength, and the powers to keep status quo are just beginning to fight back against this growing movement. So I think that we really need to have a good strategy in order to be able to handle that the coming years. From my perspective, the strategy is a lot about building public awareness, building public opinion. I go around and give lectures around Sweden in schools, universities, and communities, and talk about keeping it in the ground and what you can do and why we need to do things. But the movement in a bigger picture really has understood that we cannot do everything with a small movement. You talk a lot about a small engaged group of people and that we can save the world with a small group of engaged people. That's true. But that small group of engaged people really is there to sway the opinion of the big group of non-engaged people. We really need to pay attention to how we communicate to that bigger group because we need the majority on our side. And if they don't really have an opinion, well, that's great because that means that we can get them to have our opinion and get them on our side. And so we're really raising awareness in Sweden that we're part of the problem, and we're empowering people to understand that they are part of the solution as well. And I mean, this is all part of building a movement. That's what we're doing. That's our strategy. Build the movement strong enough so it cannot be stopped. And we're on the verge of tipping. We're on the verge of becoming so big that no matter what you do, the movement for a sustainable world is bigger than the movement to keep status quo. And we do that through media. We do that through public talks. We do that through speaking one-on-one. And speaking one-on-one is really how you build a movement. So I definitely want to push that as a good strategy forward. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Filip. I know a lot of us are looking down right now in the room, but we are opening this up to public conversation. So if you can tweet, if you want to tweet at King Top with questions, or also we have microphones ready to go to start this conversation and get everybody going. Do have a couple of Twitter questions. So the first one is, what are the legal challenges to preventing people and industry from exercising their property rights? Who would like to take that on? Martin, do you want to go for it? Sure. What are the legal challenges to preventing people and industry from exercising their property rights? So I think this goes more into law and questioning what are some of the legal barriers that you're fighting to try to halt fossil fuel extraction, including some private property issues. Alberto?
There's a lawsuit that was finally admitted into court for adjudication. And maybe there are people who know that lawsuit better than I honestly haven't read the papers. But it does say that people have a right to sue their government for what they're about on the issue of climate change and their ability to mitigate it sufficiently. In the United States, we used other means. There are regulations, environmental regulations. There are with regard to Indian tribes. There's the national Nacpil, which is graves and burial site protection for indigenous peoples, need to be consulted before their burial grounds are disturbed. Also, there's a National Historic Places Act that protects cultural places, and also, again, the United States is required to consult with indigenous peoples, as is treaty rights. The Lakota, Sioux, and Standing Rock have a treaty that would entitle them to protect their sacred areas. But all that consultation wasn't accomplished until they were at the doorstep of the tribe. And the consultation consisted of, this is what we're going to do, which is normally the consultation process. But this time around on Standing Rock, we filed a lawsuit. And to show you the malice of the company, the judge asked the tribe to tell them where the burial sites were, so the tribe revealed a couple of burial sites. The very next day, we're out destroying it. There were many arrests that day. So there are legal challenges, regulations, environmental regulations that we've tried to use, treaty rights, all kinds of legal challenges. Need to understand that with the legal challenges, those judges are part of the establishment. Many of the judges, except for this one guy who courageously upheld the admissibility of a lawsuit against the United States, are normally allowed. We see regulations, particularly environmental regulations, as a process by which the companies can get to where they want to go. They file an environmental impact statement, they do all the paperwork, and then it's very cool. Then they can go. So the Environmental Protection Agency, at least in the United States, does not protect the environment. It just allows things to happen in a more bureaucratic way. And I suspect that that's true in many, many countries of the world. I firmly believe that our greatest strength is really our frontline communities, and that's where we need to protect. We can file lawsuits to delay, we can file lawsuits to do whatever we need to do. But in the end, it's going to be our strength at the local level that keeps it from happening.
I think Lidy wants to jump in.
Yeah, in our experience, we're actually very careful to invoke current legal laws about right to property, especially right to land. You know? In many countries like the Philippines, laws on property and laws on land came with the experience of being colonized. So these were colonial laws that, when we were freed, were then carried over to the political new governance structures that were set up. So for instance, we have indigenous peoples who have had ancestral domains for hundreds of years, but whose lands were identified as private property and titled during the time of the Spanish era, and covered again during the American occupation of the Philippines, and they are the legal titles today that are recognized. We have other communities that have been living and tilling the land for hundreds of years in their families, but these lands are now owned by rich Filipinos because these lands were grabbed and then titles were applied for this, and they're the recognized owners of today. So we actually have been fighting against the laws that are governing this right to property. So we invoke other rights like historical rights, moral and ethical rights to land that farmers and indigenous peoples have a right to occupy and use and till and live on, so that we are both trying to change the law as well as in practice occupying these lands because of those rights. So yeah, legal barriers are more, in our experience, barriers to exercising the rights that are more important than just what are legally recognized property rights.
Lidy, Martin?
Yes, I'm gonna try to be brief. Yeah, I think that the legal challenge is like, as I told you, there is now build a very strong juridical security for the foreign investments on fossil fuels and other projects. And the problem is that the actual government has the majority on the assembly, the National Assembly, so they can build and they control all the powers. So one of the things that we really need to really apply our constitution, because all these laws are anti-constitutional, is to really challenge the power, to really change the power, and to really build a movement who could really change the direction of the policies of the laws and be active on the national policy issues. Unfortunately, the last 10 years also not will be all with these laws that is harming and jeopardizing juridically our territory, but it also there was a lot of action that destroyed the social movements and the social alliances. So now we are in a moment that we are trying to rebuild an alliances that could make a change, but we really need to build on under solidarity of the rest of the world and the challenge and on the struggles of the world.
Martin. I think we have a question in the audience. We'll start from the back there, and then we'll move it to you. Thank you.
I'm Kiel with the Leave It in the Ground initiative, Lingo. I have a comment. First on law, I think there is a law of Mother Nature which says if we keep burning fossil fuels at the rate that we're burning them now, this climate stability will break down 10, 15 years from now. And as Jean mentioned, in the COP, this is being ignored. I mean, the science is very clear on that, but political realities, as they call them, are in there, so they just ignore this. But nevertheless, that's the reality, and this gives us a very short time window to stop this train from hitting the wall. And over 80% of the fossil fuels need to stay in the ground for the temperature targets of Paris. And right now, governments have put up 0. Ecuador before said, oh, we will keep the Yasuni oil in the ground if you pay us, and then they pulled back. So all the governments in there are saying, we will take all of our oil, coal, and gas out of the ground, and at the same time, the Paris Agreement says we must keep more than 80% in the ground. So this depends on these frontline communities winning their battles. And I would like to talk a little bit about the interaction between the frontline battles and game-changing solutions, because there is a role for all of us who are lawyers, who are people in communications, who work on policy on different ends. There are things to be done that change the forces in favor of the communities, in favor of the defenders of Mother Earth, and against the fossil fuel industry. You mentioned the free trade agreements. That's a very critical thing, because they can put a lot of power in the hand of corporations to sue governments and keep going forward with fossil fuel projects. There are fossil fuel subsidies. I think there's a report coming out by the Stockholm Environment Institute that shows that more than half of the projects are only possible because of subsidies. If there are no subsidies, they wouldn't go forward because they don't make economic sense. The role of clean energy transitions. If you have an example to point to of clean energy, then you're much stronger in your resistance struggle, because people are convinced, okay, it is possible to live without the coal and the gas and the oil. So I would like to invite all of you to think about where are the frontline struggles close to me that I can support, and where are the structural levers that I can pull so that we all win these fights against coal, oil, and gas, because we must win if we want to keep this this place in a livable shape. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments, Biel. I believe there was a question in the audience from this lady. Thank you.
Thank you. Karen, University of Manchester. Thank you for some really interesting contributions, and the last one as well I think is really important. And what I'm really interested in is the idea of global civil society. And in looking at the strategies of social movements, I think you all gave some really good overviews as to what you do and how that works. What I'm wondering about is, how do you find national or your local strategies connect at the global level? So we're here at the COP, and through what other forums or different ways do you seek to expand your global strategies? And with that, what are the challenges there, be that legal challenges and so on? And just a quick comment on the last comment that the contributor from the Philippines made. I'm sorry, I didn't get your name.
Bolivia.
Thank you. Bolivia, sorry. So what I wanted to sort of say was that the idea that social movements are rebuilding, I think, is really important. To what extent then can social movements learn from the past, and what is it we really need to focus on in doing that? Thank you.
Great questions. Who would like to take that on?
Actually, we're doing that now. No, we know that local and national fights are extremely important and fundamental to the global fight, but we have to build it so that we can do globally coordinated fights and make an impact globally. So one of the things that we're doing is that every year we choose political moments where we have globally coordinated actions in as many countries, cities, communities in the world, and we call that Reclaim Power as a global moment for solidarity actions on transformation of energy systems. It usually happens around October. So this year, I think we still have to add up the numbers, but last year we had more than 600 actions in more than 60 countries in many cities and towns. So it's not that we are going to make real changes immediately, but it's also in preparation so that we can increase our strength and have a major global impact against corporations, against governments or vis-a-vis governments, and deliver a message that this is a global transformation that we're seeking and not just our local and national fights.
Can I?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'll respond to that also in contributing to your second question that you raised about the efforts and that we do. I think number one it's first mobilization of communities. Secondly, coming from a continent and a country where 75% or less or so hardly have accessing quality education or some form of knowledge. So we also, after mobilization, we're looking at capacity building. You cannot be in a process or in any advocacy if you are informed. And if you are not so informed, you become so irrelevant no matter how good the case that you have. And also on the other front, you're encountering very organized, mobilized, well-financed institutions that are also prepared and not ready to let off. So I think number one is like what the leader said. When we mobilize ourselves at community level, let's create a movement. The ideology and the philosophy of a movement is thinking that it becomes your way of life. It shouldn't be periodic. It shouldn't be impulsive. It should become a way of life, and you should own it at your own level, where you stand up and say, this is wrong. You don't need anyone to wait for anyone, but that comes with a lot of capacity building. Great efforts that have been done globally, but I think what we need to strengthen on from our end is also the regional integration of our efforts, so that we also have a coordinated and consolidated voice. I'll highlight one of the things that highlights the power of the spirit, as Alberto has said, and also the power of numbers. Like I had indicated on Monday, in Zambia we had the issue of the Lower Zambezi, and I've got my colleague Katati, who's an environmental lawyer there, and it took about six people who protested, arrested, and took a litigation route, and the mining was stopped. So we also need to look at the spirit and the resilience. We also go throughout Africa and have a caravan to cycle cycling from South Africa, from Mozambique through South Africa, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Malawi, Tanzania, then finally Kenya, to mobilize young people, to mobilize communities, to mobilize the women and share the agenda before us. Why cycling? Why go the other route? We have to show the resilience. We have to show that we're so ready. So that's the mobilization, and the mobilization is key. Secondly, let me also just touch a little bit on the other perspective. I think we need to bring the economics narrative to the campaign. The politicians who always say it creates 200 jobs, it's blah, 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 blah. And you know their stories. We need to counter because, for example, we did with Morgan Katati and other colleagues on a project we're calling Save the Lower Zambezi, No Mining in Lower Zambezi. We did an economical perspective that showed that actually you're having more people more employed in letting it as a tourism site and as a game reserve than having mining, because you need someone who's a qualified engineer to do it. And most of our communities are not qualified engineers. The minimum they'll become is sweepers, isn't it? So I think we need to bring that and encounter, as well as in the renewable energy sector. You know that I can participate in the process of selling a solar panel at the lowest level, you know? So it translates to the economics that are brought to the table than owning a gas station, you see, which always go back to the politicians and the people that lead in the process. Thank you.
We're wrapping up, or we're going very quickly, but there's one great question from Twitter, and then we'll have this gentleman also ask a question. So building off of your question of what globally we can do, this Twitter question asks, China supports Ghana right now in terms of coal energy. And as we see, a lot of different countries are investing, developed countries are investing in Latin America and in different places. So there are pockets of CSOs on the ground fighting it. What can we do globally to actually support both action in the developed countries and the developing countries? And Martin, I'm gonna look at you, and Max as well for that one.
Okay, yes, I think it's a really great question. Well, firstly, I think that we really need to share and try to understand the complexity of realities between each country. And I think that we really need to make an effort to understand and that complexity and how that could fit a more international strategy to address the roots of the industry. And I'm totally agree of what our comrade says, that it's more an economical issue, and we really need to address, to show and use that to engage the people. Also build an international movement means to really support beyond the narrative of the states. And I think that this is also a big opportunity to talk about. There's not a battle between developed and developing countries, because developing countries has also a very strong economical and administrative elite, and they are benefiting as well as in the north. And so we have to really change the point of view and see the people who are really struggling, and make and support not the governments, not the government of Bolivia, but the people who is fighting against the dirty projects in southern countries.
I'm sorry, I wasn't actually asking for the word. I was just thinking that was a really great question that I would like to know the answer to. But I suppose one part of the answer lies in supporting the energy transition in the less developed countries. And a huge part of that solution would probably be to lower the cost of investment in the less developed part of the world. Because right now, the clean energies are getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, and the cost of investment is becoming a larger and larger part. And that is something that we really should be able to fix quite easily.
Okay, yes, please. Yes, there should be a microphone in your way. Thank you.
So hi, Adam from Greenpeace. And before I go with my question, let me just express my appreciation and actually, love for your struggles on the front line, all of you, and also say that Greenpeace stands with you in all of those frontline struggles. My question, and I came a little late, so apologies if maybe I missed something on this, would just be on kind of the aspects of the fossil fuel divestment movement and how that kind of ties into these frontline struggles, and if you've seen kind of concrete ties between your individual struggles and some of the work going on the financial level. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, well, actually, let's take the second question from this gentleman, and then we'll round robin.
Thank you. My name is Morgan from Zambia. Happy to be associated with the movement. Yes, in Zambia, we've done quite a lot in terms of trying to stop the mining companies to come, especially in protected areas. And we've done the study, which is actually for the Lower Zambezi, showing that the investment of the mine, putting the mine in the national park, was going to create a disincentive to the communities, but also for the company, their investment was going to create a -2 in terms of internal rate of return. And we are wondering why they insisted in trying to invest. So we have the reports, which we can submit and people can read through. And also we did the ecosystem assessment to have the assets in the park. But apart from that, I'm a climate lawyer, and I did a study on the law, the role of law in promoting divestments and the forcing, the companies to divest from unburnable carbons. So in my study, in my research, I found that there are quite a lot of information coming in from institutions like international energy agents that have done, global carbon budgets, and also the WTO. So I wanted to find out, or rather just encourage the movement to try to exploit the negotiations of WTO, as well as the international energy, in terms of the updates on what they are doing in terms of the carbon budget, vis-a-vis linking it to the 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees. I think those are quite good avenues. Thank you.
Great. So who would like to chime in on these questions?
Sorry, just on the divestment campaign. Actually, the whole divestment from fossil fuel energy campaign has really done a great work of pushing our agenda forward and actually taking us on a high moral ground as far as the fight against fossil fuel is concerned. Just in terms of numbers, there's probably about close to $3.5 trillion now that have been divested from fossil fuel energy. On the one hand, though, that's on the one hand. On the other hand, though, what shows us there's a lot of work that still needs to be done is that in the South or in countries, for instance, in Asia, we don't feel yet that the advance of coal, for instance, is being held back because of the divestment. So we have to do much, much more, because it also still remains that in Asia, for instance, coal is still being pushed forward as a very profitable area. No, right now, today until tomorrow, there's going to be a coal conference, international coal conference in the Philippines, of coal companies that are talking about Southeast Asia and Asia as a huge market for the coal industry. So we really still have to fight against that. So what we need to do, alongside of the battle for divestment, especially of private companies, is also for us to push our governments to move away from subsidies for fossil fuel, because the subsidies are being devised or designed in order to serve as incentives for the private sector to come in with financing. But having said that, we also are very keen that we have to allow for our people to define what kind of just transition there will be for us as we transition and we say as soon as possible from fossil fuel to energy, because there are all sorts of issues, especially for certain countries, how this can be done equitably in an just manner. No? So for instance, we just had a discussion yesterday among climate justice groups, and one important question to ask, for instance, is how can a country like East Timor, newly liberated more than a decade ago, whose entire income or most of its income depends on the fossil fuel extraction in East Timor, how can we ensure that there is a transition that will be just for the people if they stop extracting fossil fuel completely? So this is a matter for an international solidarity and support. I mean, this is why the ask for climate finance to make mitigation possible in most developing countries, that is most needed, or most southern countries, why it is part of keep it in the ground agenda, because we have to make it possible for countries that don't earn enough even to cover their basic needs, no? Or for countries like the Philippines, one of our challenge to our government is, how come our INDC is 70% conditional? We have to have unconditional portion in that. But they're saying we need to do a calculation because we also need to spend for disaster relief, rehabilitation, and so on. We're not taking their word for it just like that, because we're also challenging them on actually how they're spending finance for adaptation and all that. But it is a legitimate question, no? So it's a whole subject that really needs the entire global community to address if we want to make it possible in the entire world.
Thank you. And going off on that divestment path, a question related to that on Twitter is, why shouldn't developing countries have the same opportunities to fossil fuels that developed countries had? So it goes into the equity issue. And how does that really play out when you're fighting this on a frontline level?
I agree on the divestment issue. The Norwegian National Bank had invested in the Dapple pipeline, and they are reconsidering their investment, and that was very helpful. We've also approached retirement funds that are big depositors with banks that are supporting them. So, but I would agree that the most important aspect of our struggle is mobilization. With regard to fairness and equity, we must recall that the Kyoto Protocol actually gave allowances to people, to states that do not have a large carbon footprint, to sell their allowances through the CDM, which only gave rise to more emissions. It is true that indigenous countries, particularly in Africa and Asia, need energy. But we believe that that energy should be, as part of the just transition, is the introduction of solar and wind and those kinds of things, than it is to try and argue with them about the economics of oil. One of the lessons that I think we both learned, or some of us learned yesterday at that meeting, was that just transition is important for developed countries. Germany has coal workers. They want to be coal workers. The US, one of Trump's main things was he's going to employ the coal workers back into coal, where I don't think the economics of the situation will allow that to begin with, but I think we also have to pay attention to the reaction of the right with regard to just transition in the developed world, because they're the ones that are headed toward this abyss of climate denial in order to preserve jobs. And from my perspective in the North, I think we need to pay a lot more attention to just transition because these people are scared, they're frightened, and they're going to the people that that appeal to those fears.
Also, just to add up, I think on the question, I think the developing countries, they are having an opportunity to make the right decision than the decision that was made by the developed countries in regards to the fossil fuels, because it's not the right decision. I mean, you can travel around most of the developed countries. There is even hardly space to develop anymore. Anyways. So I think it's a right decision for the developing countries, and to think on how sustainable their future generations and even their countries will be. Thank you.
Just to clarify that we're not asking our governments to follow the same path as the developed countries. In fact, we're asking them the opposite, to try to shift as fast as possible to more sustainable systems, to more sustainable development pathways. But I'm just presenting the reality that we have in many developing countries, that it cannot happen overnight. You have to ask, we have to address questions like addressed by our colleagues in East Timor. What are they going to do? How are you going to assure that they will have jobs and livelihoods and so on? So this is an international question. It's not just the problem of East Timor, how to shift to renewable energy as fast as they can. No? We are not talking about just transition in terms of giving time for our governments to enjoy the use of fossil fuel. We are talking about a just transition to ensure that communities, workers, whether in the south or the north, are afforded a chance to also address the questions of quality of life that many in the north take for granted, but many in the south have not. And this is not a position of our governments. We are opposing many positions of our governments who are trying to hide behind the poor. Or, for instance, my colleague Martin in Bolivia is fighting this issue because, many governments are doing that. They're saying things in our name, but it does not make the issues any less real in terms of a just transition.
I just wanted to add some words in with a concrete example in Bolivia. Is like there's a lot of communities who live just on the sides of the gas field, and they have their water polluted. They have been displaced, and all the money that we are gaining with this business in Bolivia is not investing in make the people's better life in the grassroots level. And we are actually investing more of our incomes of the fossil fuels industry to make subsidies to the fossil fuel industry. So what we are going to have at the end is, like in this narrative of the Bolivian government says that we have the right of development and we are not responsible of this, is that we are going to have a more vulnerable and more impacted people when the climate crisis arrive. So for us, it's urgently needed a very quick shift to a renewable, but not any kind of renewable, because the government is starting to build a 21 billion investments on mega dams, and this is also harmful. So we really have to complexify this discussion, and we really need to address fairness for the people who is in the front lines. But we have to be very careful that all that this fair like debate could help the national elites to reproduce and to be more wealthy, if you want, as usual.
Thank you. So we have only a few minutes left, and I know some people want to get to the Carrie speech, as well as there is coffee outside, so we can continue this discussion there. But I just want to ask everybody for their final remarks and in addressing this final question from the audience. Is it possible now to connect to COP and negotiations? How are you bringing your frontline struggles to this global level right now? How can we work together to push the negotiations further on this fossil fuel front, where fossil fuels are mentioned nowhere here? And if everybody can just wrap that up and have concluding remarks, with the sense that, this is your soapbox right now. We set this agenda. We made this a side panel. It's not discussed anywhere in the negotiations. So please give us your final remarks on that. And we'll start with Filip on the end.
All right. As regards to the question, together, cooperation, discussions, talks, lobbying, media, building opinion. As for my final remarks, I'd say that we need to keep it in the ground. So this is a message for the Swedish leaders and for the national governments of the world. We need to keep it in the ground. If it's not economically viable to keep it in the ground, we have to make it economically viable. If it's not possible to keep it in the ground, then we'll make it possible. We need to realign our societies to fit the actual physical situations instead of trying to realign the physical situations to fit with our society.
Thank you. Just thinking outside the box as well, is that we need to, mostly when I look at the delegation, is in the yellow badges. To get it to the COP, we need the pink badges. We need to get to where things are happening. We need to get our conversation head in the right places as well. I think that's a starting point to get it in the COP. The other one is that we need to build the capacity of the movement and manage the knowledge of the movement. In my concluding remarks, I think we need to bring a few things to the movement. One, we need to bring the moral perspective. Forget the science. I mean, forget what, I mean, the politics, forget. You don't need to be a Christian, a Muslim, or Hindu to know that killing a person is bad. So let's bring that moral perspective. Forget the science. Just know that it's bad. Let's keep it in the ground. Just that. Just that is enough. Secondly, we need our voices to be heard. And we need, if there's an African story, let the Africans tell it. If the European story, let the European tell it. If the Asian story, let the Asian tell it. As I was leaving home, I was told, we are praying for you that you are safe in Morocco, because they always see that the Arab uprising is rife. And I'm here and I've been moving at night and peaceful because someone tells the Moroccan story. And that's wrong. I think to the campaign, we need to tell our story. Second, I mean, lastly, but not the least, we need to bring to the conversation corruption. I'm coming from Africa and the world. There's corruption. And these processes are with multinational. Even our government are not with us at times. And there's corruption. Corrupting our people to be part of the movement or to be against the movement. I mean, corrupting the processes, to corrupt even the legal systems. I think we need to bring the overspilling effect and underline that we are not factoring into the campaign, so that if we go this way, what are the challenges we face? And I think, and I believe, that when we bring corruption at the center stage, we'll as well as address issues to do with human rights as well. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you very much for, I look forward to great networking. I hope that these are just, sorry, so just a few minutes. I'm passionate when I talk about this. I hope we'll not come and meet and say, our last meeting was in Mediterranean, and what was the last point? I hope we'll meet next year and say, what are we doing in our countries? How far have we gone with networking our movements, growing our movement? What are the real efforts with the real people that have never been on the plane, but they leave the effects? They do not cultivate on their land because their land is being polluted. As you know what happens with emissions from coal, they meet with the rains. Do you know what they do to the land? Those are the realities that we need to address. The people that are going every day on an empty stomach to bed because they are potential refugees of climate change. Thank you.
I really have to agree totally with Mr. Mumba about the importance of the story, the importance of the narrative, and the importance of networking. I've been working within the UN system since about 1990, something like that. And the value has not been, although we have some successes as indigenous peoples within the UN Human Rights Council and Commission, our greatest success is networking. Our greatest success is knowing each other's story. Our greatest success is our solidarity. And that's what we really come here for. We learn a great many things from each other. So I honestly believe that even though we can affect the negotiations through interconstituency groups, through the Human Rights and Climate Change Group, the Indigenous Peoples Organization, women in particular are very important in that solidarity. And the stronger we are as interest groups and civil society, I hope that the interfaith group becomes better known, because I think that their values, they address the issue of morality. They don't address the issue of finance. They address our relationship to our Mother Earth, and that we must really develop that. Those relationships are the things that will allow us to continue the cycle of life. So there is an importance, and I think that through our lobbying, we can at least draw attention to them. We had some success with human rights and indigenous rights and the rights of women and just transition in the last COP, although very minimal. But that takes a great deal of time, and the urgency is now, keeping it in the ground now. And for that, I think the most important part is the solidarity that we can build with Africa, with the Philippines, with Asia, with North America. I think people don't really understand sometimes that in North America, the indigenous peoples live a reality of poverty that is the same as any country in the least developed world. The Standing Rock Reservation has about 80% unemployment. So understanding that reality, our reality is your reality. Our reality is the reality of Africa. Our reality is the reality of the Asian indigenous peoples and forest-dwelling peoples and landless peoples. We are all in this together. And I think that the more we can really build on that and not just say it here, but follow through with it, I think our successes will be greater inside. And in that regard, I'd like to invite people. We're going to have a solidarity action tomorrow at 13:30 or 1:30 outside the Blue Zone, where we hope to promote the solidarity of everyone, indigenous peoples, against oil production, against oil expansion, against all that is the false economy that Mr. Mumba was so eloquent in speaking about. So we hope to see you there. Thank you very much.
Lidy?
Well, just two short things. I'm sorry I have to run off to an action, actually. First of all, a friendly disagreement with my friend Boniface about forgetting about the science. I really think we shouldn't forget about the science. It's also because many governments and negotiators claim all sorts of outrageous things that are not based on science, and science is telling us we have to keep it in the ground. So we need to also look at the science. And then secondly, just to invite all of you as our way of bringing in the issues of dirty energy in this COP, there's an action tomorrow at 1 o'clock, Reclaim Power Action against all dirty energy, including the so-called solutions to climate change like nuclear or biofuels and agrofuels that deprive us of our right to food. It includes mega dams that displace communities. So it's 1 o'clock at the restaurant area, and I'm sorry for rushing off. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lidy. This is a panel of movement makers. Okay, next.
Very briefly, I would just like to say that climate change is not a legal issue. It is not a diplomatic issue. It is a political issue. And success at the COP and everywhere else ultimately depends on winning majorities among the peoples for changing the politics. And at least in the European environmentalist movement, we have not been good enough at creating those alternatives. Why? Well, partly because it's difficult, but also because we have been doing things wrong. We have talked too much about the facts, about science, and about the science, about the science, about the problems, about the problems, about the problems, and our long lists of detailed proposals that we are presenting to the public. I mean, you need detailed proposals. I'm not against detailed proposals, but what you need to do to convince people is you have to talk about the problems, but you also have to create hope that these things can be solved. And instead, we are bombarding people with figures and percentages and policy proposals, and that is not really working. So I would like to tell you that there is a small, very short, very readable, fact-packed, fully referenced briefing about what does the evolving field of climate communication say about effective ways of reaching people and convincing them that we need to change track on the world. And if you go out through the door on the right, you will find this briefing. And I think you might find it very valuable. Thank you.
Thank you, Max. And Martin?
Thank you. Well,
I think that the UNFCCC will not solve the climate crisis, and it is clear. It's like we have 20 years of negotiations and we are worse than ever. And so why is happening that? And it's the same at the national level. Why the governments are taking the irrational pathway of fossil fuels industry? It's because, or other harmful energy projects, it's because the companies who are behind, they have decades buying governments who make decisions in a national or international level that just protect their investments and their interests. So I don't think that the states or the UNFCCC are going to solve climate crisis. We know, as the science says us, that we are going, with the Paris Agreement, we are going to be more than 2 degrees Celsius. So I think that we really need to build this movement, as my colleague says, build a movement of solidarity that really challenge destructivism on the ground and from the ground, and really address the roots of the problem. The climate policies doesn't define in a climate policy thing. The climate policies and the climate really were affected by the development policies. So we really need to focus our struggles on that direction. Thank you very much.
Great. I want to give a warm welcome and thank you, applause to our wonderful panelists today, and thank you all for being here and being part of this movement. We have coffee and snacks outside as well, so you can keep talking to our panelists. Thank you very much.